Welcome, and let's explore the origin and development of Qadari movement and its key figures, Maʿbad al-Juhani and Ghaylān al-Dimashqī. We'll dive into their bold advocacy for human free will, the political challenges they faced, and the lasting impact of their ideas on Islamic thought. The Qadari movement is often linked to Maʿbad al-Juhani, a respected muhaddith from Basra. His father was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and had lived in Kufa. However, the historical records do not clarify why Maʿbad moved from Kufa to Basra. Although it is speculated that his father's support for Uthman radiallahu ta'ala an might have made his staying in Kufa difficult after the first fitna or the civil strife. In Basra, Maʿbad became an influential figure within the Umayyad elite and served in various important roles, including acting as ambassador to Byzantine Emperor and tutoring Sa'id, the son of the Caliph Abdul Malik. Despite his prestigious career, his fortunes declined, and he was executed around the year 699, likely under the orders of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, and though some accounts suggest that Abdul Malik ordered his death. Scholars debate the reason for his execution. Some argue it was due to his alleged involvement in Ibn al-Ash'ar's failed revolt, but the majority believe his Qadari beliefs were the primary reason. Maʿbad openly preached the concept of Qadar, human free will, which earned him the level of the first to speak about the Qadar in Basra, or أول من تكلم في القدر بالبصرة. However, details about his specific beliefs are scarce. One report by al-Balaghri mentions that Maʿbad argued God didn't will Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu's death, and which implies those responsible acted against God's will. The origins of Maʿbad's Qadari doctrine are also debated. Many sources claimed he learned it from a Christian teacher named Sawsan, who may have converted Islam and later apostatized, and this claim is primarily attributed to al-Awza'i, a staunch opponent of the Qadari movement, and might reflect his efforts to discredit the doctrine by associating with Christianity. This narrative served a polemical purpose during Abdul Malik's reign, when Islamic identity was being shaped in contrast to other monotheistic traditions. By labeling Qadari beliefs as having Christian roots, opponents sought to marginalize them and align Islam more closely with predestinarian views. Maʿbad's most famous student was Ghaylān al-Dimashqī, whose early life remains obscure. He was likely a non-Arab mullah, possibly of Coptic origin. Ghaylān gained respect and a high position within the Umayyad bureaucracy, and he served as the director of mint in Damascus under Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. His expertise and administrative role suggest he was trusted at the highest levels. However, Ghaylān later lost favor with Umar ibn Abdul Aziz due to his public preaching of Qadari beliefs, which led to the confrontations between the two. And later on, Ghaylān served in the army in Armenia under Marwan ibn Muhammad, but eventually returned to the Damascus, where he was persecuted and executed for his Qadari views. The sources vary on who ordered his execution, with some attributing it to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, others to Yazid ibn Abdul Malik, and the most credible accounts to Hisham ibn Abdul Malik. Unlike Maʿbad, Ghaylān's doctrinal views were more developed. He was known for his Qadari beliefs emphasizing human free will, but also held the broader theological views. He was classified as part of the Murji'a, a group advocating the deferral of the judgment on sinners to God. Additionally, Ghaylān believed the faith involved acquired knowledge rather than being innate, and that a non-Qurayshi could lead as imam. Ghaylān was rumored to have written numerous rasails and treatises, though none of them have survived. Reports suggest that he had a following of loyal supporters, some of whom were exiled after his execution. And despite his intellectual contributions, most account of his beliefs focus on simple assertions rather than detailed arguments. The strong oppositions to both Maʿbad and Ghaylān reflects the broader attempt to discredit the Qadari movement. By linking it to Christianity and portraying its opponent as heretical, opponents sought to marginalize their teachings and align Islamic orthodoxy with predestinarian doctrines. Historical and biographical sources shed some light on Ghaylān's Qadari beliefs, but the details remain frustratingly vague, and the most informative accounts are from his interrogations before his execution. Unfortunately, these reports do not provide any in-depth explanation of the nuances of the Qadari doctrines. Instead, they focus on fundamental doctrinal questions, and more often they use simplistic examples rather than the sophisticated theological argument. For example, many reports mention questions about whether God will that Adam ate the forbidden fruit? While this highlights the tensions between the divine omnipotence and human free will, it offers little insight into the specifics of the Ghaylan's beliefs. The sources also emphasize the origins of the Ghaylan's Qadari views rather than the doctrines themselves. His connection to his teacher Maʿbad implicitly links his ideas to Maʿbad's Christian or apostate mentor Sawsan. And similarly, Ghaylan's nickname al-Qibti, which implies the Coptic or Christian origins, reinforces this association. Some reports go even further and explicitly claiming a Christian influence on Ghaylan's view. For example, Ibn Asakir in his Tarikh Ibn Asakir recounts a prophetic tradition describing the Qadaris as the Christian and Magians of this community, Nasara wa Majus hadhihi al-Ummah. Some accounts often treat Qadari beliefs as foreign ideas that infiltrated Islam are particularly from Christian sources. And this perception influenced both early and modern scholarship. However, scholars were skeptical about any direct influence from Christian theology on the Qadariyya or the early Islamic doctrine. And despite this, it remains clear that the many biographical sources intentionally sought to connect Ghaylan and Qadariyya to Christianity. And this raises another question, another fundamental question. Why do hagiographical sources neither treat the Qadariyya as a prominent movement nor provide a thorough explanation of their beliefs? Part of the answer lies in the politicization of the Qadariyya under Ghaylan's leadership. While it is unclear if Qadaris were politically disruptive from the start, by Ghaylan's time their involvement had become entwined with the politics. And during his stay in Armenia, Ghaylan and his followers appears to have engaged in the dissent against the Umayyads, though the evidence of the open rebellion is lacking. And some reports describe their activities as spreading like a wave through the army. And this might explain the hostility Marwan ibn Muhammad showed towards them, as well as Hisham's decision to exile Ghaylan's followers after his execution. And these actions suggest that Ghaylan's Qadari movement was perceived as a potential threat to the regime. And whether the reports of their political dissent are entirely accurate or were crafted to depict Ghaylan and his followers as danger to the state remains unclear. However, the portrayal of Ghaylan's Qadari beliefs as both politically and doctrinally subversive reflects the complexities of the movement's history. The Qadaris became deeply involved in politics shortly after the execution of Ghaylan. Yazid ibn al-Walid, who led the uprising that sparked the third fitna and ultimately led to the fall of the Umayyad dynasty, adopted Qadari beliefs as part of his political or the public platform. While Yazid wasn't a prominent leader of the Qadari movement before the turmoil surrounding the brief reign of his predecessor al-Walid ibn Yazid, many of his close associates were well-known Qadaris. However, the Qadaris' political success was short-lived. Even before their eventual defeat by Muhammad ibn Marwan, Yazid appears to have started abandoning the parts of the Qadari agenda. It is unsurprising that Qadariyya evolved into a political movement. Their central beliefs that humans are fully responsible for their sins has clear political implications. It is uncertain whether the Umayyads recognized this connection when they initially persecuted early Qadari leaders like Maʿbad and Ghaylan. And by the time of the third fitna, however, the Qadaris' call for political leaders to take responsibility for their sins had become a rallying cry. Many were particularly distressed by the moral corruption within the Umayyad court. And the Umayyad state doctrine grounded in the Khalifatullah ideology and that held that the Caliph's actions reflected God's will. As God's chosen representative, the Caliph was believed to deserve the absolute obedience. And this doctrine was heavily promoted by the Umayyads. In its most extreme interpretation, the Khalifatullah doctrine rejected any dissent and asserted that even the Caliph's most heinous actions were divinely willed. In contrast, Qadari's doctrine separated evil deeds from the God's will, assigning full responsibility for such actions to human beings. And this stance allowed and perhaps even required the pious Muslims to challenge sinful rulers. The political consequences of this belief were significant, as it directly opposed the authoritarian claims of the Umayyad rulers. The Qadari's transitions to open dissent also had theological implications. Their increasing oppositions to Umayyad clashed with their historical association with Murji'a, or the Murji'ite ideas. Murji'ite theology emphasized the deferring judgment of sins to God and avoided condemning individuals for their specific sins. While Murji'ites debated what constituted a grave sin severe enough to challenge someone's status as a Muslim, they refrained from passing judgment on specific acts, preferring to leave such matters to the divine judgment. And this theological hesitation stood in contrast to Qadari's willingness to hold rulers accountable for their actions, and particularly those viewed as sinful. The Qadaris became politically active during Yazid ibn Walid's revolt against the Umayyads during the Third Fitna. And unlike the more passive Murji'ites, they openly condemned unjust rulers, holding them accountable for their sins and calling for their removal. And this approach aligned them more closely with the Khawarij, who also combined belief in human responsibility with harsh judgment of major sins. Yazid adopted Qadri ideas to challenge al-Walid ibn Yazid, who claimed absolute authority as God's chosen ruler, using predestination to justify his actions. The Qadaris countered by asserting that the rulers were responsible for their deeds and accountable to both God and the community. However, after gaining power, Yazid distanced himself from the Qadari principles, leaving questions about his sincerity. The Qadaris' involvement in politics transformed their doctrines, turning it into a call for government accountability and challenging the Umayyads' claim of divine authority. And this political activism ultimately contributed to their decline. And after the Abbasid revolutions, Qadari leaders were marginalized, and their association with the political failures tainted their historical legacy. And despite their short-lived prominence, roughly 50 years, Qadari's ideas influenced later theological movement, particularly in Mu'tazilite doctrines of human free will. However, Abbasid era historiography distanced the Mu'tazilites from Qadaris, portraying the Qadaris as politically subversive and emphasizing alleged Christian origins of their beliefs to delegitimize them.